There we go. Good morning, Washington State. This is Amanda Polly. Thanks for hanging tight while we worked out a couple technical details. We're glad to see the numbers climbing up there. Thanks, Pat, for hanging tight as well. Once again, this is Amanda Polly. I'm with DBHR. That's the Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery, if you did not know that already. And I am your Eastern Washington Supportive Housing Program Manager with the Healthcare Authority and all things permanent supportive housing. I would like to introduce to you someone who needs absolutely no introduction, but just in case, this is the fantastic Pat Tucker from Advocates for Human Potential, our wonderful and all-knowing Fidelity guru who is here to talk to us for day one today, and then returning for Thursday at the same time, same place for day two of Fidelity Reviewers Training. So if you're here with us today, you're here to learn about Fidelity reviews and how to become a trainer, what to expect, and what not to expect. So please hang tight. Know that you can ask questions in the chat box or the question box below. We will do our best to answer them as we're going. And then, oh, hi, Kimberly. Kimberly's here too. I'm going to toss you, Kimberly, into the organizer attendee piece so that you can chat as you would like as well. And we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to mute myself, so I'll stop talking and and hand it over to you. Thanks, Pat.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am, certainly can.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. How is everybody doing today? I really do want you to use the chat box. We need to communicate with each other, and in these days, seems like chat boxes are our main mode of communication, other than phone. So I'm assuming that you all are in the right place. Um, and I wanted to start off. We don't have enough time to go around and do introductions. Um, but I wanted to kind of get a sense of who you are. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being you know everything there is to know about permanent supportive housing, and 1 you know nothing about permanent supportive housing, I want you to enter into the chat box where you think you are on that scale of 1 to 10. Remember, 10, you know everything. 1, you know nothing. So go ahead and write in the chat box, everybody, and let's see where we are.
Hey, Pat, are you able
Yes.
to view everything in the question/chat box?
I don't see anything in, I can see the chat box. I can see what I wrote, but that's pretty much it.
Okay, so you can't see, so you're not able to see where it says questions
No, I
and
can't see
everybody's writing
questions.
in there?
I can't
Oh,
see the questions. Oh
okay.
wait. Oh wait, no, now I can. I
Oh,
see.
good. As
I
an organizer, you should be able to see the questions piece. So now you should be able to see what everybody's writing in there. So
oh,
we see like 6.5. I love the 6.5. That makes me happy. I'm a 0.5 kind of gal myself. 4, 1, 6, 2, 3, 3, 5, 5, 7, 3, 5. That's fantastic. No, Danielle, you're right. You're not going to be able to see anything in the chat boxes or the question box that isn't directed towards everybody. Everything in the question box comes only to the organizers. It's kind of the weird thing about GoToWebinar. That's why we really like Zoom, but we just don't have access to it yet at the Healthcare Authority.
yeah. And so I appreciate everybody writing in there. So we have a range. I think the highest number I heard was 7. And then I think there's from we're in the group of 1 through 7. So that's pretty good. All right. So, but and everybody on this call knows that this is a call about or this is a training for those people who have some interest in becoming a fidelity reviewer, right? Which means that you will be able to learn about what does it take to be a fidelity reviewer, and we can ask questions. And also, becoming a fidelity reviewer is going to give you the opportunity to actually do a better job on your end in your programs, because you'll know all there is to know about what the reviewers are looking at. So let me just go back and start off with why Amanda gave me such that the glowing recommendations. I've worked in housing for over 30 years, and I did permanent supportive housing probably before some of you on this call were born. That's the scary part. Um, and permanent supportive housing has come a long way. When I first got into permanent supportive housing, um, it was in the 90s, early 90s. Um, and everybody was doing permanent supportive housing, and we had a big conference and we all got together. It was a huge conference where all of these permanent supportive housing providers got together, and guess what? We were all doing different programs, even though we were all saying we were doing permanent supportive housing. So, what this led to was that the funders were saying to us, look, we are not sure of what permanent supportive housing really is. It's confusing. We go to all of these programs, everybody's saying they're doing this, but everybody's doing something different. And so they brought a team together of people with experience in the field, and they started to take a look and break down what permanent supportive housing was. And that's where we are today, is we have this lovely toolkit, and it helps us to figure out um, what it is that we're supposed to be doing. Pay no attention to this introduction. Um, it- this is if we were in person, which I wish we were, but we're not. And pay no attention to this because we broke it up. I already asked you this. We do have some resources, and you will get access to this PowerPoint plus some more materials. So don't worry that you don't have it already. You will get it. But there are no secrets to doing permanent supportive housing. That's the great thing. I remember many times having people come in to look at my programs, and I was not always clear about what they were going to be looking at and if I had done everything correctly. The great thing is you could go to the SAMHSA EBP, and EBP stands for evidence-based practice. PSH stands for permanent supportive housing. You can look at the toolkit. You can look at everything out there about this, and it's not a secret. The the key is learning to make sure that you understand all of the parts and how they work together. So, I'm gonna jump in. So, what is an evidence-based practice? Because, we hear that a lot, and I'm sure most of you know, but it means that the program has been validated by research. Different investigators have looked at all of these components, and they have decided that these components are the right components based on the research. And there's also a manual that goes with this. So when you hear evidence-based practice, that's what is being referred to. There's research, there's we all the components have been laid out, and there's a treatment manual. Um, I wanted to start with some of the premises of permanent supportive housing, and I think these are important, and these really helped me to understand just to get an overall picture of what we were trying to do. So, in one of the premises is that clients can make their own decisions. And that's an important one because if we don't let clients make their own decisions, then it's going to be much more difficult to keep people housed. Um, Another one is good, effective partnerships work together to treat the whole client. So that means that none of us work with the client by ourselves. For the most part, there are other people that will be a part of this partnership. It can be their behavioral health specialist, it could be a substance use specialist, it could be a probation officer, it could be family members. All of anything that the client feels like is part of their necessity, or maybe sometimes the team or the person, the housing specialist working with the client might make recommendations of who would be a good partnership, a good partner for this. They can make that suggestion, but it's not, we can't do this by ourselves. And if we try to do this by ourselves, it's the person that will suffer the most will be the client, and the second person will be the staff person who's trying to do everything by themselves. This is not that kind of a job. Another premise is clients need unbiased info from their staff to make their own decisions. What do people think that means? That mean when I say unbiased info? Any ideas, thoughts? You can write in the chat box or the question box. I'm just curious, when you see that, what are you thinking? I'm trying to get to the questions or to the what people are writing.
One person wrote without judgment.
Without judgment. It's without judgment. When I say unbiased info, that means giving people just the facts, not giving them your opinion. Even if you have a strong opinion, even if you don't think it's the best fit, our job is not to make that choice. It's not to make that. eh, And a lot of times we end up saying to people, well, there are all of these choices, but I think for you, this would be the best choice. No, that is not what we do. What we do is we give them the information. We lay out all of the choices, and we lay out all of the info without judgment. And I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that later. But I think that's important to think about. The staff's role is to support the client in their journey. Our job is not to drive the bus on this journey. Our our job is to be a passenger, but support. We're like the GPS, maybe, in the car. The person says they want to do this and go to this place, and we are there to say, Take the next right, and go to this place. And but we're not there to just um say to that person, well, I think you should go to this place. And yeah, I know you said that place, but I think this place is better for you. That's not our job. Clients need individualized plans because clients have different needs. When somebody looks at files or comes and looks at your work, it should be in the client's own words, and it should be not the same for every client. Always get suspicious if every client that you work with wants to live in Oxford housing. Why would I get concerned about that? Well, what are the odds that everybody wants to live in Oxford housing? That's very low, unless you only have a couple of clients. So far, am I making sense? All right. So the tenants have these are key elements of permanent supportive housing. So these elements are things that you just need to keep in mind when you're doing permanent supportive housing. The tenants need to have a lease in their own name and the full rights of tenancy under landlord tenant law. So that's important. It has to be in their name. The leases should not have special provisions that would be found in the leases of someone without. So basically, we want everybody to have a plain lease and not a lease that states that in order to keep your housing, you must meet with your housing specialist once a week. That that is something that would not be in a regular lease, and therefore we don't want to see in the leases of people who are moving into permanent supportive housing. It may be in their lease, but that has to be the client's choice. We want to make sure that the supportive services are available and accessible, and are voluntary. So all the services that you're going to be providing are voluntary. You cannot make somebody do something unless they want to do it, or you should not be trying to make them do it. That means we also have to look at how we do our supportive services. Are we providing opportunities for the clients to dictate what they want and what they need from you? And are you flexible enough to be able to provide it? Um, we want also for the housing to not have special rules or rules that you would not find in everybody's housing. So if you think about your housing, um, there usually the rules are you pay your rent, you respect your neighbors, blah blah blah. You don't cause problems. That's what we want to see. We don't want to see stuff like if you don't go to services once a week and take your meds, you can lose your housing. We want people to be able to have their housing separate from their services. So far, we're moving. All right. Some more elements. The housing is not time limited and the lease is renewable at the tenant's or owner's option. So basically saying it's important that the housing be based on the lease and not be based on anything else, and that the person should be able to stay there as long as they're abiding by the lease. Um, Prior to moving into permanent supportive housing, tenants are asked about housing preferences and are offered the same range of choices available to others at their income level in the same housing market. So basically, we need to put all of the options on the table so that the tenants can make a choice. And every option should be on the table. And we're going to talk more about that one too, because this one is one that I think we get hung up on a lot, and we don't we start to limit ourselves because of what we know in our head or the information. Um, Another element is that the housing has to be affordable. With the tenants paying no more than 30% of their household income towards rent. Um, we want at least one affordable housing option on the table as one of the choices. And I know a lot of you will be like, well, how can we do that when there's not a lot of affordable housing? And we're going to talk about that. So keep that question in there and we'll get to it. The other thing that's important is that the housing has to be integrated. We know from the research that people do better when they're in housing that's integrated into the community and not in housing that's set aside for people with some kind of special needs. So that's important. We want to make sure that tenants have a choice about the supportive services they receive. So they get to say, I want services and here's how I would want them. Here's when I would want them. Here's where I'm at, what I need. And those can change based on where the tenant is at. So a tenant could be one day they could be feeling pretty good and thinking that, I don't need to see you every week. How about we just meet once a month? And then it could change in the next month. Something could have happened and they might want to see you, twice a week. Um, but the program has to be flexible enough to deal with that. Um, we also want to make sure that the services are there to promote recovery and help tenants to choose, acquire, and keep housing. Um, and finally, we want to make sure that the housing is separate from the services. We don't want to see your services tied to the housing. For instance, if people, you could have a policy that states that if tenants do not see services at least once a week, they can be kicked out of your housing. That is not permanent supportive housing. So we don't want to see that people have to go to services in order to keep their housing. Am I making sense so far? Are people is this people getting this, or am I talking a different language?
I understand you. I get it.
Well, yeah, you're a trainer. You've done this.
Oh, okay.
You've lived this.
You mean I live and breathe it? Okay.
Yes, you
Well,
live and breathe it. Thanks.
so it looks like everybody so far is getting it. The principles are very clear, and what they're following. Everybody's saying it's making sense and they're understanding so far. So that's good.
Yes, very good. Great. So part of doing this work in permanent supportive housing, and I would say in any evidence-based practice, is doing an assessment. Um, and it's a person-centered assessment. It says on here face-to-face interview, person-centered face-to-face interview. Um, that might not always be possible in this environment, but you still can do, if possible, FaceTime or Skype. If you can't do face-to-face with somebody, so using your technology, if none of those are possible, you can also do on the phone. It might be more difficult on the phone, um, but it's possible. But you really want to talk to the person. You want to be able to identify what strengths the person has. Um, and I put strengths first because I think it's important that we build off of a person's strengths and not judge or make our decisions based off of challenges, because people know everybody has challenges, but everybody has strengths and assets. One of the things that has always been helpful for me in this field is looking at the person's strengths and building off of those, because those strengths are what I'm going to use to help that person to see that they have power, that they can do stuff and they have done stuff. And so I'm going to utilize that to my benefit and to their benefit when we start working together on their plan. What is it that they want to do? Um, it's important to know the needs and the challenges, because those are things that we can try to um, work with people on. Like, if I know one of the challenges for a person is that they always want to move in people into their unit because they feel like that's, they should help out others. Well, that's something, at some point I'm going to have to help that person with, because we don't want that person to lose their housing. But it's not something that's going to stop me from working with them. We have our job as staff is to educate people about their housing options. And when I say housing options, I mean all of the housing options. We we should not be eliminating options without talking to the person. And so, it becomes very important to lay out all of the options and provide that non-judgmental uh, information about each of the options. And we'll talk a little bit about more about that. I mean, I'm gonna harp on the options, the housing options, because I think that's one of the keys to being successful at permanent supportive housing, is being able to put all the options out there and help the person to understand what those options are and what it's going to take to take on each of those options. We also need to talk about strategies if they need to get into some additional programming or some additional places. There have been times that I've been working with a I call the people tenants because they were in the housing. But there have been times that a tenant ends up getting into housing and wants to start working on other parts of themselves, such as working on their substance use. Well, I'm going to have a way to develop that relationship if I don't have one, so I can help that person get into the best substance use program that they can get into that works for what they're trying to do. I wanted to talk a little bit about informed choice, because informed choice, um, I think people, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. Sometimes people think they're giving informed choice when they're not. Um, and so let me just talk a little bit about what informed choice is. It means that the client gets to make the choice. Our job, the job of staff, is to give them information, period. And that's where the unbiased information comes in. It's really about just going through all of the options and all of the what we see as the information that's needed to make that choice. So for instance, if I were to sit down with you and lay out all of the choices for housing, what would be on that list of choices? So write in the box or write down what are all of the choices that people have for housing. Are you writing? I'm not seeing anything in the chat in the box. Ah, housing is so limited. Okay, I and where they want to live, location, size, cost, which rental unit. Um, so here are the things that I think are on the list that you when you're working with clients or people. Um, so one of the options is regular housing, right? A regular apartment is one of the options. Another option is affordable housing. Another option is having a roommate. Another option is and see one of the things I see in the chat box that is part of the issue is that some people are writing that it's so competitive, affordable housing is not available, the housing is limited, and the prices are high on the housing. All of that's true, but that doesn't mean that's not an option for that person. And I don't want us to be saying to people, well, the it's really limited and you should take whatever it is you can get. Or yeah, you want those, but it's out of your price range. We should not be limiting people's choices because of information because we know that affordable housing is limited. Yes, Haley. Client centered, listen to them. Absolutely. So one of the things that we need to be doing is saying to people, here are all the options. Here's an affordable housing option. Yes, there's a long wait list. And you're going to be on that wait list for a while. If that's what you want, we can get you into that. We can get you on the wait list. And that means that, getting them onto the wait list, I may say, well, from what I've heard, it takes at least 2 years to get to the top of the list. And if that's what you really want, let's put you on that list. But now that you're in that housing or that you're on that list, we need the plan for what are you going to do right now? What is the option for right now? And so we might have two plans. We might have a long-term plan and we might have a short-term plan. But it's important that I not take things off the list because I see what the market is. I'm going to put a regular housing unit on there, and people are going to say, oh, well, that costs too much. They can't afford it. Guess what? One of the things that I would like for them to think about is if that's something they want, then that could be a long-term goal is to work towards that. And we will develop a plan to work towards it. They may decide, I may say, well, here's how much the rent is on a one bedroom apartment. It is $1,500. And then they say, "Oh my goodness, that's a lot of money. Will you pay? Will somebody pay for that?" No, that's a regular apartment. And if that's something you're interested in, it might be it's something you can work towards. You can also get a job to get that. Um, and then I'm going to talk about the affordable housing option. Wait list is 2 years long. You get on that, you have to wait. You may be waiting for 2 years. Also, I'm going to put on there roommates. Have you ever had a roommate? Is that something you might have an interest in? That's a way we can try to get you into housing sooner than later, is if you are willing to live with a roommate where you can split the cost. Another option on there might be renting a bedroom or renting a room in a house. Another option might be um, Oxford House. Another option might be any other type of programming housing that there is. Another option may be if you can be lucky enough to find somebody who does permanent supportive housing and they have their own wait list. If they're a veteran, another option might be HUD VASH. Um, but putting all of the options on the table is the easiest way to do this. Um, and let them decide. When you start saying stuff like, well, there's this, but there's really not a lot of affordable housing. And and so why put that option on the table when they don't have much of a chance of getting in there? Well, already you've taken off one of my options without even consulting with me as the client. That how is that giving me informed choice? How is that giving me choice when you're taking choices off the table before you even talk to me? So it's important to um, put everything on the table and not take stuff off the table. And I really want to emphasize that one of the things we know is that when people have a say in their housing, they are going to do much better in that housing than if they don't have a say. So if you find that everybody you're finding housing for is not making it through a year on a good a problem might be that you're not giving them the choice up front. So you need to make sure that you're listening to the person and that you're not taking stuff off the table before you even talk to them. You need to let them take stuff off the table. It is not your job to take it off the table. And it's also your job to just give them the information. What is it that they need to do if they want to get an affordable housing? Okay, it's a 2-year wait list. I want to put my name on the wait list or put my name in there. I do that, and then I may say, well, but I need someplace to live now. What am I going to do now? And then we come up with the second plan. What are you going to do now? So hopefully that's making sense. So one of the things is, why do we do this? Why do we want to access or assess our fidelity? Assessing fidelity is a way for you to keep checking in to make sure that you are doing things the way they need to be done. That you're paying attention to it. If Here's the thing, if nobody's paying attention, everybody starts to do what they want to do. And so that's one of the reasons why we have a fidelity assessment. Because we want to make sure that people understand that uh, these are the things we're looking for. And so, this slide is if what gets measured gets done. If nobody's measuring or nobody's, coming up with a plan for how to get this done, then it probably won't get done. So that's why we do fidelity assessments, to just keep everybody on the same page. Um, we know that when you do things, when you do permanent supportive housing, if you are doing things according to this model, and if you're following the recipe of permanent supportive housing, you're going to have better outcomes. We know that, and this is always something that we also have to think about, is outcomes are important because outcomes are how we get funding and it's how we keep our jobs. But it's also how we keep ourselves honest in doing what we need to do for the people we work with. So we know that it's important to measure what we're doing, because if we're not measuring it, it probably won't get done. All right. So does anybody out there know what the dimensions of permanent supportive housing are? No. I appreciate that. Very new. Okay. All right. So let's go through. So I'm not going to have you do this assignment because we have a lot of new people and I don't have a way to put you into a breakout group. So here are the dimensions of permanent supportive housing. I want you to look at these dimensions and I want you to try your best to try to keep these in mind. Now, you can write them down. You can print off the manual on permanent supportive housing. These are the dimensions though. So when you're doing a fidelity uh, assessment, when you're looking at programs, these are the things that you're looking for. You're looking for choice of housing. Where you're looking to make sure that housing and services are separate. You're looking to make sure that the housing is decent, safe, and affordable. You're looking to make sure that the housing is integrated. You're looking to make sure that people have rights of tenancy and access to housing and flexible voluntary services. Now, that I just said a lot of words. And you probably don't, if you're new, you don't know what these all mean. So we talked about this one already. Um, Name all the choices. So we mainly talked about the types of housing, but somebody in the chat box was writing down, who you choose to live with. When you're meeting with a client, um, oh, well, let me rephrase this. Has anybody out there helped somebody locate housing and then they moved in people with them? Oh, the last one of the 7 dimensions was the flexible voluntary services. Yeah, I see somebody has had somebody move in people. We can try to eliminate that issue by asking people up front, what is who do you want to live with you? Because that's going to affect their housing, right? That's going to affect where they live. That's one of those things that we need to take into consideration. So, say somebody walks into your office and says, I want housing. You go through all of the housing and say, here are all the options. And they say, oh, well, this one, I want affordable housing. And you say, okay, that's fine, but let's go back and talk about who do you want to live with you? Who will be living in this apartment with you? And that becomes crucial because we don't want people moving in people with them. Okay, I got people asking about the dimensions. I'm going to go back to them. Now remember, you're going to get these slides and you're going to hear about these dimensions over and over again. We're going to go through each of them, but I'll put them back on the screen so that you can see them. But in the choice of housing, it's also important to know who that person wants to live with them, because then that's going to also affect their choices, right? If they want to move in their girlfriend, boyfriend, or friend, they're going to need to be on the lease. And so it becomes important that we know that, because that's going to be how we're going to make sure that this person understands what can happen and what can't happen. So if they want to move in a girlfriend or boyfriend, if they're going to want affordable housing as an option, they both need to qualify for that affordable option, right? Um, they also need space for that option. If they want to move in a boyfriend and some kids, that's going to affect all of their choice. So we need to know who people want to live with them, because that is going to be part of how, that choice up front, to hopefully eliminate that choice or the bad decision that they make by moving in people when they're not on the lease. So we need to have that discussion up front. People need to decide who they want to live with them. So that's the first dimension that we went through, is choice. So getting a choice of what type of housing, getting a choice of where this housing is located, getting a choice of if the housing is in a large, a big building with an elevator or a building with stairs, are also different types of choices that people can make. Some people like being on the first floor because they don't want to do the stairs. Some people like to be in elevator buildings. All of those are choices that people will get to make. So it's not only choices about the housing, it's choices about the unit, the actual apartment. Some people want to be in certain parts of the city or certain parts of, the town. All of those are options that we need to help the person think about and make sure that they understand all of the things that come with that choice. The next dimension is separation of housing and services. And this mainly becomes an issue when agencies have their own housing. Um, so are any of you at your agencies providing the housing, or you have master leases, or you have actually some housing that you're moving people into, or is that not an issue with anybody here? So I see people they do have housing, they do have master leasing. Okay, so here's where this really applies. you want to keep services separate from the property management. So if your agency is doing master leasing, or if your agency has their own housing, this becomes even more crucial. People need to make sure that there's a legal separation between housing management and service delivery, meaning that the property management gets to pay attention to the housing, to the actual building, and the services pays attention to the person. Those departments should not be sharing, too much information with each other, only information needed to help people maintain their housing. Um, but it's important that the property management only do property management functions, meaning the property management should not be having discussions about a person or with the person about services that they need. And a lot of times people will talk to the property manager because they see the property manager, and they may start sharing information with the property management. Property management needs to be able to say, no, that is not my area. You need to talk to services. If it's something about paying rent or something about behavior in the building, then property management will be involved. But not property management should not be sitting there talking to people about what their problems are, about, whether or not they're drinking or whatever. That's not a property management role. So hopefully this makes sense for those of you who are doing master leasing or doing or have your own apart or housing. You really do need to pay attention to um just keeping those areas very distinct and very separated. Are there questions up to now? Because so far we've just talked about two of the dimensions. Are there questions? All right, gonna keep going. This is to me is the easiest one. One of the dimensions that is easy. Safe, decent, and affordable. Safe means we need to make sure that the housing is safe. And I know a lot of people say, well, how can we do anything about that? Well, your job is to just make sure that the apartment is safe. And that means that all housing needs to have some type of walkthrough. Now, if it's a walkthrough, if the housing is subsidized by any government, it's they're gonna do they're gonna come out and investigate the housing. So we're not too worried about housing that is government funded, say, Section 8 or project-based Section 8. We know that there's going to be an HQS or a housing quality standards uh, provided. But for all other housing, we need to see in people's files a copy of an HQS inspection form. Now, a lot of staff go, I'm not qualified to do that. Well, there is a form that has been developed by those of you before. And so this is where we can share information. There's a simple form that is in one of the databases that you can complete for every person who moves into housing um, that does not have a walkthrough or a housing quality standards. Um, it's simple enough for anybody to do, and I highly recommend making sure you have access to that form. And I'm trying to remember if that form is in which database. Amanda or Kimberly, where would they find that form?
Pat, which form again is it?
That HQS form, the
That that would be the wiki.
so
I can post it. Now after every webinar, we send a follow-up email, and in that follow-up email, we will send not just the slides and not just like things like the scorecard, the principles of PSH specifically for this webinar, but we will also send links for things like the wiki that you were just talking about, so that you'll have each one of you who are listening right now will have the ability to hop in there and find those things, like the HQS form, and the long version as well as the short version, and all of our assessment forms as well and tools.
and I highly recommend using it. The these forms have been um, done by other groups who came before you. So the thought was with Wiki was to hold all this information and to make sure that people don't have to recreate the wheel. So I highly recommend going to the Wiki link and downloading the HQS walkthrough or the HQS inspection sheet, and every file of every client who gets housing, there should be an HQS form in their file. If they are subsidized through HUD, we know there's been an inspection. So if you aren't able to get a copy from the client, don't worry about it. But if you did the walkthrough, you need to have that form in the file. And that's how we know it's safe and decent.
And
Eh,
and Pat,
Yes.
maybe just to add in there, not to interrupt, and I apologize,
Oh no,
but
don't worry.
just just to let our listeners know, is as nice as it is to be certified to be one of those individuals who can go out and know how to do those 7-page walkthroughs. You don't have to be certified for the sake of fidelity to do a walkthrough with your participants, and the individuals that you're serving, on an apartment to know whether it's safe. The 1-page or the 1.5-page walkthrough that Kimberly found in lieu of the 7-page HQSs work really well, and they're really fantastic for our participants, and help people feel as though they're in charge of what's going on around them. And they're easy readers. You know, nobody's really asking you to measure or anything like that. It's more about making sure hot water and cold water and water pressure and ovens and stovetops and refrigerators work and stuff like that. But it's a really great way of making sure that that's all taken care of. And so, including your participant in that walkthrough process and making sure that you're doing it. And even if it's market rate, and even if it doesn't meet HQS, Pat spoke earlier about that informed choice piece, and that's part of it. You know, if your participant chooses to pay market rate rent and live in a place that wouldn't normally meet HQS, which is housing quality standards, that's acceptable if that's their choice. You know that, but as long as you're noting that in their chart or in their file, and you have their HQS, and and they're making their informed choices, that's really what matters here, in the long run. So just throwing that out there. Thanks for letting me interrupt you, Pat.
Oh no, and thank you. And absolutely. Yeah, and we're going to talk about that later, is that some people are going to choose places that don't meet housing quality standards. I had one person who decided they wanted to live in this place that it made my skin crawl. I walked into the apartment that they wanted to live in, and there were so many roaches. I said to the person, okay, I'm gonna run back to my car and I'll be back. And I ran to my car and I put my bag in my car because my first thought was I don't want to have roaches in my bag and to be taking them home. The When I met with the person, I said to him, um, are you sure you want to move into this place? I have concerns. I'm looking at all the roaches and, you know, and I said, we could find something better. Um, and he said, no, 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 this is the place I want. This is my choice. I want this house, this apartment. And I I looked at the landlord and I said, okay, he wants to move here. Is there anything we can do about the roaches? And the landlord was like, yeah, I'm gonna fumigate. Um, and I don't know if it'll get rid of all the roaches, but it should get rid of most. But I'll do that for the next couple of months is fumigate. And the client was happy to have that apartment. It was what he wanted. It was not what I wanted. I kept having concerns about moving somebody into this type of place, and that client thrived in that place. And the reason he thrived was because the people that he was on the street with, specifically two guys, also lived in that building. And basically, they were able to be in that building and support each other in their sobriety because they all uh, decided to go get clean and sober. And basically, they were each other's, support. And that's why he wanted to be in that building. I did not know that. He did not share it with me. I didn't find this out until later that that's how he was making his choice. A lot of times people are making choices based off of information and they're not always sharing it with us. And that's fine. The thing for me was that I listened to him. I did, voice my concerns, but I did not try to talk him out of living in that apartment. He made the
Right.
final decision. He moved in there and he thrived.
My main concern is making sure that everybody who's listening knows that if you're able to dial in, and of course this is limited to COVID restrictions and your your policies and procedures around that, is knowing too that if you're able to call in, you're able to go through a piece of paper with your participants. You absolutely do not have to be certified unless your agency requires that from you to do a walkthrough with a participant. That's what I'm saying too. On
Yeah,
top of respecting their choices, don't get hung up on the certification process. You don't have to be somebody who's certified in order to help somebody find out if their unit passes, some basic HQS stuff or doesn't pass for that matter. So
right.
that safe piece, you're totally capable of helping somebody figure that out. Don't worry about waiting 2 weeks and possibly missing out on an apartment or a house for a participant because you're waiting on somebody who's certified to come and help you figure those things out. You definitely take the reins into your own hands, and you and your participant go get that stuff done.
Right. And it's not, I mean, we're talking basic things. And this is, if you're a housing specialist, you should be able to do this regardless, and you should be doing it. When people are choosing apartments, you should be doing a walkthrough and doing it with the client so that the client knows how to walk through an apartment. Anybody here who has ever had an apartment, I am sure you walked through the apartment to make sure that things worked. Opening the windows, making sure they close and lock properly, making sure that the door locks properly, making sure that the heat works or the air conditioning works if it has that, making sure that the stove and the refrigerator are operable, making sure, like Amanda said, checking the water pressure, making sure the hot water works, making sure there's smoke detectors in the apartment, and that they're operational. Those are things that don't require you to have special skills. It just requires you to check and make sure that they're working. And those are basics of a walkthrough. And and you should be doing that with every apartment that you go into with a tenant or a client, and teaching them how to do it, showing them how to do it, asking them if they see things that are wrong, uh, highlighting when there's damage to the unit. Even if the client's like, oh, that's no big deal, I don't mind that, that the floor has a couple of cigarette burns in it. But it's something that we as staff need to note, that the floor had several cigarette burns in it, so that the client doesn't get charged for that when they move out. A lot of times landlords will not pay attention to that kind of stuff, or they may start paying attention when the next client is wanting to move in and say, oh, wait, you caused damage to my apartment. But if you have that written down or a photograph of it, then that client will not be held liable for some damage that was done by someone else. But it's just a basic thing of anytime you move into an apartment, you should be doing the walkthrough of the apartment and making sure that our clients know how to do that, making sure that we're comfortable doing that. So integration is another one of those things that we know is important for people. We don't want to create places where everybody has the same issues, or everybody has mental health issues, or everybody has substance abuse issues in the building. If you have your own housing and you have, people have to have a disability to move in there, I wouldn't worry about it so much. But we want to make sure that when we're moving people out into communities, that we're trying to not just put people in housing that is set aside for people with disabilities. And research shows us that having people mixed into communities is better than having that one building in the community that houses all of the people with mental health needs. So then that building becomes stigmatized, and everybody's like, oh yeah, that's the building where all the people, with problems live. We want people to be in the community. We want them to be a part of the community. And we also want to help people to establish some natural supports. We do not want to be the only support person for all of our clients. So, one of our jobs is, once we help people get into housing, we need to also help them to figure out ways to develop a support system that they can turn to, and not always turning to us for everything. And now that may take people different lengths of time depending on the person, but we do know that housing integration is important. And it also helps people to develop friendships and relationships with others. It's like all of us in our housing. I know I have people in my community. If I lock myself out of my housing, I have a neighbor 3 doors down who has one of the keys to my apartment or my house. If I lock myself out, I go down the street and get keys. If I need somebody to give me, um if I need a cup of sugar, I know which neighbor I can go to borrow a cup of sugar. That's what we're trying to encourage with the housing integration is we want people to be in the community so they can develop these type of relationships so that one, they are not totally dependent on us, but two, those relationships are normal and are what, recovery is about, is becoming part of the society again and not just limiting yourselves to hanging out with people with the same issues as you have, hanging out with people with different issues. Um, Rights of tenancy, easy. Rights of tenancy. When you see rights of tenancy, that means that the person has to have a lease in their name, and it should be a regular lease. Now, the only way that it's not a regular lease is if they're moving into some type of special program housing, and then it's a different kind of a lease. So when Amanda was saying that, tenants choice, tenants can choose to live in places that don't have a regular lease, but that must be clearly documented in files. So if you have, I don't know, 20 clients on your workload, and out of those 20 clients, 18 are living in um let's say Oxford housing. What would you think about this? Or if somebody had 20 clients and 18 of those clients were living in Oxford housing, and the two that weren't living in Oxford housing were still looking for housing, what would be your thoughts about that? What are you thinking? I got 20 people on my caseload and 18 of them are in Oxford housing. That the clients aren't really given that much choice. Absolutely. Thank you. We need when you start seeing things like that, you should become a little suspicious because most people do not will not. I can't imagine that out of 20 people 18 will decide to be in Oxford housing. What I would come away from that thinking is the staff person, this was the easiest housing to get everybody into, and this is why the person is every 18 people in Oxford housing. So those are the kind of things when you're looking at people, if it seems to be, it just looks skewed, we have to take a look at it and see if the paperwork um, helps us to identify whether or not the staff person is biased, or is it that the staff person, or maybe they're working with this Oxford housing to do some other things, but the documentation and the files is going to help us to make that determination about whether or not this was the person thinking that this was a good option, or if the clients were choosing this, or if the staff person is just kind of pushing everybody in that direction. So that's where the documentation comes in. But everybody in their file, everybody in their files needs to have a lease. That has to be in the file. And we need to see the lease because we need to see certain information on that lease. The information on that lease that we need to see is whose name is on the lease. Um, we want to see the tenant's name on that lease because that means they have rights of tenancy. We also want to see the address that's on the lease. We also want to see the amount of rent that the person is paying. Um, and we also want to see if there are any program rules on that lease. So leases need to be a part of the file. Is everybody clear on that? All right. I see yeses. Perfect. Access to housing. This is one of those that gets a little tricky. It's very simple. It's a simple concept. Access to housing is really about, are we letting people have access to the housing without a ton of hurdles? And so those hurdles are things like staff saying, no, you're not ready. And now here's where it gets tricky for a lot of you. A lot of you are working in behavioral health organizations. And a lot of you may be working in organizations that people have to get referrals to come to you. And those referrals may be doctors psychiatrists might be referring them, or therapists or other case managers might be referring. Where when we look at access to housing, we look at all of your partners who are referring people to you. Now, what we want to see is that anybody who says, I want housing, should be referred to you, no questions asked. It should not be the psychiatrist or the psychologist or the therapist or the another case manager saying yes or no. I will not refer you because you're not ready. That's going to affect your score. So your score is in fidelity is not just based on the work that the individuals in the permanent supportive housing program are doing. It also applies to your referral sources. And if your referral sources are internal to your agency, then we're going to be looking at that and making sure that they're not limiting access to to the housing program. Um, if it's external uh, parties that are going to be doing this, we want to make sure that those are also not limiting access to the housing. So we really are looking at your program, but there are parts that we will be looking at. It could be your entire agency, or it could be external agencies who are referring to you. Does that make sense to everybody? I know it's one of those strange things, but it's also about your housing and about you educating people in your agency, or educating the people who are referring to you. You want to make sure that they're not sending everybody who wants housing to you. If they're telling you, uh, we're only going to send you certain people, or you find out they're only sending you certain people, you have to go in there and make sure they're trained and that they're sending anybody and everybody who wants housing. All right. We're going to take a break soon, so hold on. I know we're getting into a lot of information, and it's a lot to digest. Oops. The flexible voluntary services is fairly simple. We want to make sure that clients or tenants can say, I don't want your services right now. Um, but that doesn't mean that staff stop trying. Staff still need to keep trying to engage the person. Um, I find that sometimes the easiest way to do this instead of waiting for people to refuse services is to really establish a relationship with the person at the very beginning and make it so that the person feels comfortable with you, trust you, understand that you're trying to help them in this process, and that we're offering services that the person wants and needs, or services that the person wants. If we're not providing the services that the person wants, then the person is probably not going to be coming to us. So if you're only offering services such as budgeting, um, or you're offering a group about how to clean your apartment, you might not have a lot of people coming. But we have to be flexible in the way we provide services, and not always providing services in a way that is, easy on us, but not easy for the person. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So for instance, it's hard to get people to sit down and talk to me about budgeting, because people, that's not fun. It's not an interesting dialogue, and most people don't want to do it. So I am able to throw in funding in other ways, or not funding, but throw in budgeting in other ways, such as a person is moving into an apartment. It's in a new neighborhood, one that they've never been in. And what I may say is, have you thought about, where the grocery store is? Do you know where the grocery store is? Do you want me to go with you to the grocery store to make sure you know how to get there? And the person may say, sure, yeah, I would love if you go to the grocery store with me, that would be great. I will go to the grocery store with the person, and I will be able to do a lot of different things in that grocery store that will go into my file. For instance, if I'm going to the grocery store with with a client or a tenant, we're going to go to the grocery store the way they would go to the grocery store. We're not going to get in my car and drive to the grocery store, because how is that helpful? Um, my job is to help this person become independent and not need me. So what I'm going to do is, if the person is going to walk to the grocery store, we will walk to the grocery store together. If they have to take public transportation, we will do that together. But I'm not going to put the person in my car and take them to the grocery store. If they have a car and that's how they get to the grocery store, then then it's fine to either go in their car, or we can go in separate cars and I can meet them at the store and we can walk through the store together. When we walk through the store together, I'm going to be talking about different things. I'm going to be talking, and not bringing up stuff, but if I see stuff, such as I took one person to the grocery store and he started filling up the shopping cart with all these 2-liter bottles of soda. And my first question was, why do you need so much soda? And he said, I have a hard time staying awake, and so I drink a lot of pop. And I was just like, that doesn't seem to be healthy. Um, why do you think you're drinking so much pop? And he was like, well, the medication I'm on makes me tired and sleepy. So one of the things that I noted, and we talked about it, was we need to talk to the person who was at prescribing the meds to see if there were other options for medication, or if there was a different medication to help the person deal with the side effect of their medication. Um, so we were talking about medication at the grocery store. Um, Another thing I asked him was, how are you going to get all of this home? Because we walked to the grocery store and there was a lot of soda to try to walk back to the apartment. And he said, well, you can help me. And I said, I cannot carry that many bags. I'm willing to help, but I'm not committing to carrying that many bags. Um, so then, one of the things we talked about was how, what's a way to do shopping when you walk. Um, that how do you get all this stuff back home? So for him, we decided, or he decided, he wanted one of those shopping carts that you can put stuff in and walk it down the street. So that was going to be, one of the things that we were going to work on, is trying to figure out where we could get him one of those from. We also talked about, he kept wanting to choose all the name brand products in the store. And one of the things that I pointed out to him was, okay, if you look at this name brand, this is Campbell's chicken soup, and it costs, I can't remember what the cost was, but it was, I think at the time it was like $1 a can. But then I showed him, I'm like, well, but if you look at the generic version, that is 75 cents. That's a quarter of savings. Um, and it's the same soup. It's just in a different can. And he kept saying, no, it's different soup. And then it was like, no, it's all the same type of soup. This one is just generic. Um, and you save money, since he was buying, like 12 cans of soup. 12 times a quarter adds up. And it doesn't add up to a lot, but when you're on a fixed income, that's a lot of money to be throwing away for a name brand when you can get it um, at a cheaper price. I also showed him in the grocery store how to compare prices, because you know a lot of times there's a price, but you're not always comparing equal products. So showing the tenant how to look at the little labels and see how much the same products cost per ounce, or per, you know and just like, okay, so this cost 25 cents an ounce, and here's one that's 18 cents an ounce. The 18 cents an ounce sounds better, because, yeah, the package is bigger, but you're paying less money for it. So just all of those, what skill sets have I just done in the grocery store with this person? I've talked about budgeting. I've talked about medication, and talking about, maybe trying to figure out a way to deal with the medication issue. We've also talked about um the soda. And oh, and when I was talking about the soda, I was saying, I also was explaining to him how it wasn't good for his teeth. And I, said, when was the last time you saw a dentist? And he said, it had been, I don't know, a lot of years since he had seen a dentist. So I said, that's something that we should think about, or you should think about. Do you have an interest in seeing a dentist? I know how we can get you hooked up with the dentist. That's something that'll be important. At some point, we talked about food and nutrition, because everything he was putting in the shopping cart was junk food or stuff that could be microwaved. Um, and I said, I see you're getting a lot of those frozen dinners, and you're getting popcorn and potato chips. I don't see a vegetable or a fruit in the cart. And he was just like, well, I don't know how to cook vegetables or deal with them. And fruit, he was like, it's hard to eat. I like apples, but I can't really eat apples because my teeth hurt. So we talked about a lot. And so when I got back to the office, I was writing all of this in my chart because we've covered a lot of topics just in a grocery store visit. And that's how you get creative. You get creative about showing and doing stuff with the clients. I also found out that he didn't know how to cook. And I asked him if that was something he had an interest in. And he said, yeah, he thought about it and he would like to learn how to cook some basic stuff. Um, so one of the things that I was able to do was we had access to um it was I found the program out there that they did cooking classes, and I was able to work with them to have them teach some of our clients some healthy cooking classes. And we did it all at their location. I found a small grant to pay for it. It didn't cost that much. We just had to pay for use of the space, and the teacher volunteered her time to do some cooking classes, and it was all around how to cook and eat safe, healthy, but with food that tastes good. So they got to eat everything they cooked, and they learned some skills on how to cook and how to eat healthier. um, so there are lots of ways to do this. We sometimes get into this habit of it's always been done this way. We've always done a budgeting class, and everybody has to sit down and do a budgeting class. We don't have to do things that way. We can be flexible. We can do services in a way that makes sense for that client and in a way that that client can understand it and can move forward with it. And it's also something that I was teaching him and helping him to think about stuff in a way that he hadn't thought about it. So that's what the flexible and voluntary services are about. And I've only ever had one person in all of my 30 years that refused services. One person. And he was not well. He this was a case of an outreach worker not listening to the client. And I'll tell you this because I want you to be able to see where we could have done a better job, and how I think we let this client down. Uh, so we were doing housing. We had a housing program, and this client, the outreach worker came and said, I have this person who needs housing. He would be perfect for this building. Um, and I want to try to get him into the building. And I worked at the building, and I said, as long as he meets the qualifications of the building, or he has in that building, you had to have either a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue or both to move in. And that was our funding. That was not something that the staff dictated. And so I'm looking for a person who has, you know, who meets the qualifications of the building. He said, "Oh no, this person meets the qualifications. Um, and let's if we can get him on the list, we'll get him on the list." And I said, "It's fine. If he wants to move in, that's fine." And so I met with the client, and we did the whole process. And I hadn't realized until he moved in, because this building did not accept pets. He had two large dogs, this client, who had been on the streets for, I think, 15 years. He had been homeless. And this outreach worker worked hard to get him invested and to move into this building. So the person he gave up his two dogs to move into this building because he was being pushed by this aggressive outreach worker who thought He was homeless, he needed housing, we had housing, and it was good, decent housing. I mean, I would have lived there. Um, but so the person moves in and he starts having problems with the person next door. They in this building they had to share a bathroom between two units. So they were sharing a bathroom. The person that was his bathmate was not the cleanest person in the world. Um, and so the roommate came, or the bathmate came down to tell me to complain about the other tenant that just moved in. So I go up to talk to the tenant. I get to their apartment, or to his apartment. I knock on the door. He lets me in. The first thing I notice is that he's cooking some beans and he's cooking it in a can. And I said, I'm sorry, didn't we give you pots and pans? I mean, because I thought we might have not given him pots and pans. And I said, I'm pretty sure we gave you pots and pans, or if we didn't, we can get you some. And he was like, no, I have pots and pans. And I was like, okay, well, why are you cooking in a can? And he looked at me and he said, what the hell do you care? I took off the blank, blank, blank label. So what's the problem? And I said, well, we gave you pots and pans for a reason, and they're safer than cooking things in a can on the stove, because that can will get awfully hot, and it's not the appropriate thing to be cooking on the stove when you have a pot. And he just looked at me and he was like, I'm doing things my way. And I said, okay. And and meanwhile, I mean, he was being very he was not wanting to deal with me much. But I had no choice but to deal with him because I have the person who he's sharing a bathroom with down in my office complaining about him. So I brought up the fact that there were issues with the bathmate, and you know I was recommending that the three of us sit down together to come up with a plan for how we were going to manage the bathroom. Uh, and that plan was going to be about who was going to be cleaning and when they were going to be cleaning, and what um, how much cleaning was needed for each of them to feel comfortable. This client looks at me and says, I don't need your help. I don't want your help. And I'll deal with my roommate in the way I deal with people. I don't need you to be involved. And I said, well, but we need to make sure that everybody was being safe and that we weren't putting people in a situation where things could get out of hand. And he just lost it and said, I don't want you in my life. I don't want you dealing with me. And if my roommate keeps complaining, I will kick his fat white ass. That's what he told me directly. And I said, no, that is not allowed in this building. But at the same time, I was moving toward the door because I did not feel safe. I felt like this man was about to explode. And as I was getting to the door, he was saying to me that he had given up his dogs to move into this building. And now people were trying to tell him what he had to do and what he couldn't do and what he could do. And he was pissed. And I don't blame him for being pissed. Um, he was pushed to move into this building by his outreach worker. He had given up his dogs, and those dogs meant a lot to him. And then he ended up in the building where he didn't agree with the rules that were set out, even though we talked about that up front. He did not like the rules. He only said yes, that he would deal with the rules because he was feeling pressured by the outreach worker. Needless to say, this man was in and out of the building within 4 months. and he was angry, and he didn't trust staff anymore because he gave up his two dogs to move into this building that he was already moving out of. It was not good. And what that demonstrated was he didn't really have choice of this building because he was being pressured by this staff person. And I'm talking this staff person worked with him for a year on trying to get him to move into the building. Um, and I think the not having choice was key. If he had a choice, he probably would have moved into someplace different, one place that he didn't have to share a bathroom, one place that he could keep his two dogs. And as you can see, that was not helpful for the client. It was not helpful for our building. It was not helpful for me. And when I contacted the outreach worker, um he he felt horrible and was saying how he thought that this would have been the best option for this person, but now he was seeing that it wasn't a good option. And he but that relationship was lost. That client did not want to talk to him anymore, did not want anything to do with this outreach worker. And of course was out there telling everybody that this outreach worker was a liar, and he was not putting people in the best situations. It was something that didn't have to happen. And that's what happens when we try to force people into options that are not a good fit um, for that person. So, is everybody clear about all of the different dimensions? All right, I'm seeing, let's see. So, people are clear. Everybody got those dimensions down. Now, I would recommend, until you have them in your head, you have something at your desk where you can look them up. But these are the things that are going to tell us how people are doing on their fidelity measurements. If you're doing all of these dimensions as they are laid out, you are following the recipe and you should have good outcomes. How about we take a 15-minute break? What time do we end, Amanda?
We are done at noon.
Okay, so we have an hour and 15 or 17 minutes. So let's take a 15-minute break, everybody, and then come back in 15 minutes to keep going. Everybody okay with that? Take your breaks. We'll be back
Sounds
at, say again, Amanda?
so that sounds good to me. Come back at 11.
Yes, it will meet back at 11, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks.
cake at this time of the day makes sense. All right. Are we back?
I think we are.
All right. All right, everybody. So we got an hour to go. So let's dig into this a little bit deeper. Out of all of the seven dimensions that we just went through, which ones do you think are gonna be the most difficult or the most complicated to do? Are they all easy? Ah, the decent, safe, and affordable housing, separation of housing and services. Affordable housing is hard for anyone. So I think yes, the affordable housing is hard these days. But I think the important thing to remember is that it has to be one of the options on the table for everybody. And to and it doesn't mean that people can get it right away, but it still has to be one of the options on the table. Um, are there any of these that are easy or that you think are the easy ones? Any easy ones? Or are they all challenging? So the separation of housing and services is easy. That's easy. That is one of the easiest ones for agencies who don't have their own housing. Because you're working with private landlords, it's easy to keep those two separate. Any questions about any of the dimensions? We went through and I gave you a lot of information about the dimensions. Are there questions? Or is there something about the dimensions that um, are you didn't understand? I like what you're saying there. Hold on, let me go back. So um that the overall they are comprehensible, easy, but the implementation is the difficult part. I absolutely agree with you. It's the implementation that gets people into trouble. And what gets people into trouble are statements that say, well, there's no affordable housing here. There is affordable housing. It might not be available, but it is there. And so, one of the things when we're talking to our clients is to be clear about okay, there is affordable housing, um, but maybe it's not going to be available right now. But we do put it on the table and we say that maybe it's a little bit later that affordable housing would be available. It might not be available now, but it will be available in 2 years maybe, and we put your name on the list. Um, and that's all we can do it doesn't mean that there is um no housing there. It's hard to read the what's in these boxes. Let's see. Um, let's see. Somebody wrote something. Um, Housing available, but the bureaucracy hinders it. Absolutely. But all we can do is just let the person know, look, this housing is available. It's affordable, but it's not available right now. We can get your name on the wait list. Now we need to have a secondary plan of how we're going to get you housed now because you still need housing. Does that make sense? But I see people trying to take it off the table because it's not available now. And we don't take it off the table. We never take it off the table. Even if the waiting lists are closed, we tell the person, here's the affordable housing that's in this area. Let's take a look at it. And then we also make sure they know that there's the wait list is closed. I heard that they were going to open the wait list up in 6 months. In 6 months, we can get your name on that list, but it doesn't, it's still going to take a while before your name comes up to the top of that list. And you need housing now. So we need to have a two-pronged approach for this. All right. I'm going to stop talking about affordable housing. So the scoring is from 1 to 4. So if you're doing a 1, that means you're just barely doing anything. I mean, you don't get a 0, which is good. Everybody gets a 1. And it just means that you have a program. It doesn't mean that you're really doing the things you need to do. A 4 means you're doing things as well as you can possibly do them. And and you are making it work. So the highest you can get is a 4, the lowest you can get is a 1. So if you get a 1 on something, it means that area needs improvement. If you get a 4, it means no improvement needed. You are doing marvelous. So a 1 equals not implemented. A 4 means it's fully implemented. So if you get a 4, that's great. You don't have anything to worry about on that dimension. Um, so that's one of the things to keep in mind when you're looking at the scoring. Um, One of the things that we do in this is that, and what you all signed up for, is the possibility of being a fidelity reviewer. And when you're a fidelity reviewer, it means that you will do the scoring together. And every team will have an experienced person heading up the team. So you will have either Amanda or Kimberly heading up the team. You will be a part of that team if you still are interested. And when you do the scoring, everybody sits down and looks at the sheet, the scoring sheet, and decides on what score that agency gets. And then you all talk about it. And then for each dimension, that team does consensus scoring. So that team has to come to some type of an agreement about what the score should be for that dimension. The highest possible total score you can get in permanent supportive housing fidelity is a 28. I can tell you I've been doing this job for a long time and no one has ever gotten a 28. And the reason, anybody know the reason that nobody ever gets a 28? Who wants a prize? Give me the reason why you can't get a 28. Always room to improve. That's a good answer. We are all learning. That's a good answer. But there's one thing, room for improvement, absolutely. But there's one thing about this that makes it fairly impossible to get a perfect score. And if you, and this is if you say all of you were at, remember when we started and I said on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being you know everything, 1 being you don't know anything. Say we're all tens. What will prevent us from getting that perfect score of 28? We all know everything there is to know. There's always new staff because you're working with people. And remember, one of the dimensions is choice. Remember that? One of the dimensions has choice in it. And if people have can choose, remember I told you about the client who chose that apartment with the roaches and all of that. That that apartment did not pass a housing quality standard. It did not pass. I could not, and it was what he wanted. And when you're working with people who get to make choices, you're not going to get perfect scores because people are going to make choices that are not in line with what you want or necessarily what you want. Some people may choose to live in a market rate apartment and the rent's extremely high, but that's where he wants to live. That means that's going to take your scoring is going to take a hit. That is okay. The most important thing about this is that we give people choice. They get to make their own choices, Eva. You're absolutely right. And when people get to make choices, that means we could have all the best plans, but people can choose something different. People can choose to go into an Oxford house or to some other program housing that is going to take down our score. Over the long haul, that really doesn't matter. If you remember math, and one of the things we do is when you're looking at this um, and giving scores, the scores are not the important part. And I know people get caught up on the numbers and people want to get that 28, which they'll never get. But I would not be so caught up on the scores. What is more important than the scores is what is written about why you got that score. And that's the part that you have to pay attention to is why did you get that score? If you get a score of a 3 on something, you want to look at what did that team say that you could do to improve your score. And that's the most important part. So don't get caught up on that number. Pay attention to the actual uh what's written about how you can improve. That's where all the juicy and good information is. Not in the fact that you got a score of 20. It's what do you need to get your score up higher? And that's the part that you need to look at is what can you do to improve. Doing this whole process is about continuous improvement. We know that a lot of teams starting off are not going to start off with a high score because they're learning, they're trying to, bring in new staff, trying to get everybody trained. Everybody's coming in with their own ideas. So we know that the high score is not going to be there. And also, we also know there are things outside of your control, like some of the bureaucracy that you have to deal with in housing programs, some of the pains of trying to get people into affordable housing. If when they are doing your fidelity review, they have to take into consideration the environment, the what's going on outside of your control. Right now, one of the things that might be affecting people is COVID. The fact that maybe your agency has decided to go extreme and not have staff being able to meet face to face with clients, and everything is done virtually, and trying to look at apartments is virtual. So you're looking at pictures on a screen. That can affect your scores because people are not out there doing what they need to do. They're doing it from their house. And it may make things a little more complicated. It may make things that every client might not have minutes on their phone all the time to talk to you. Um, so there are outside forces that can also affect your scoring. So the most important thing about the fidelity report is read what is said. Don't just look at the numbers. If it's a 4, you're doing great. What you should start targeting are the things that you did not get a 4 in, and look to see what the reviewers wrote about why you didn't get that 4. So if you're thinking about becoming a fidelity reviewer, if you heard me say report, you heard correct. Everybody has to take a part in trying to write the report. It is much easier when it's done as a team, but that still means that everybody on the team has to be able to write about why didn't a certain program get a 4 on this dimension. So I just want to be clear that part of being a fidelity reviewer is also assisting in writing the report. And it's actually easier when it's done in a team, because when you're in those team meetings and you're talking about why you're giving this group or this agency a 2 on choice, you're going to be talking about why everybody has their chance to say why they think it's a 2. So all of your information that you need to write up is being talked about. So when you're meeting as a team to do the consensus scoring, you need to be taking notes, right? So when you're taking notes, you can help to write up the explanation for the agency on why they got a 2 on choice. And so I just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on that, because I know a lot of times people think, oh, all we have to do is give it a score and then we're done. No, we have to write a report because people want to know what they can do to improve. Okay, so on dimension 1, the choice of housing. So when we do this, we have to go through and look at whether or not tenants have a choice of the type of housing. Clean and sober housing, apartments, housing, you can score either a 1. A 1 means you're not implementing this, you're not giving people choice. A 2.5 means you're giving limited choice. And what do I mean by limited choice? If I come to your program and you say, here's what we have. We have our own housing and this unit is available. You're not giving me real choice. Or if my only choices are between that apartment or a Oxford house, that's not a full choice. So that would be a 2.5. If I have a complete choice, that's a 4. Does that make sense? So no choice, it's a 1. So if I'm putting people into my own housing and we're not looking at anything outside of our own housing, it would be a 1. And that's not a horrible thing. One of the things, if you are supervising a program or managing a program, you have to manage is where can you take hits on your score? Because you can still take some hits on your score and be doing a pretty good program. Um, but that's something that a manager has to be thinking about. So So that's one score on choice. Another score is real choice in housing unit. So say somebody is looking at moving into, say you have your own building and they want to build a unit in the front of the building on the first floor and they're not available to get that unit. And the person really wants to live on the first floor. Then you should be showing other units on the first floor. If people are not able to choose the unit that they want to live in, then that's a 1. If people get to choose the unit they want to live in, that's a 4. So either you're doing it or you're not. There's no middle ground in this one. So it's either a 1 or a 4. Tenant can wait without losing their place in line. So say somebody is in your program and you've gone out to look at housing and they really want they want a unit on the first floor and you guys can't find one that they're happy with. That person should be able to wait without being punished because they wanted that unit on the first floor. We do not get to say, oh well, we looked at 2 units that were available and you didn't like either one of those, so we can't work with it. No, they go on a waiting list, and when a unit becomes available that meets their criteria, then you can go show them again, and if they're interested they get to be housed. And that score is you can get between a 1 and a 4. And the easiest way to do this part of the dimension, is to have a policy stating that, if somebody can't find the housing they want, they can go on the waiting list, and then we will be actively looking for that type of housing. And if when we find that they can, again, we'll find them and they can go and decide if this is a unit that they want. The other part of choice is the choice of living arrangements. Did the tenant get to decide who they live with? The way we know that is looking at the documentation, looking at the files, looking to see who's in the unit, making sure you ask that question up front. What we then have to do to get the score for choice of housing is we take the scores that we got on these 4 pieces and add them all together and divide by 4. And that is how you decide what the score is in that, um, what the score is. Um, I'm reading a question that's in the question box. It says, um, scoring includes external influences which would be out of program control. How do we mediate? That's a good question. Uh One of the things that you do, if say for instance, one of the things that's out of your control, um and I'm trying to make it specific to this one in choice. Give me an example of what would be out of your control in choice, or are you thinking about the other dimensions? Oh, the wait list. the one of the things that you have to do if is create a wait list that you can work with. And also, if you're the manager of the program, you need to have, you can make a policy about, people who we can't locate housing for. We'll go on a wait list, and on that wait list, here's how we're going to deal with the wait list. But that's a manager question. Your managers of the program should be developing a policy around wait list within the program, and how do you manage those wait lists. Um, those wait lists are really internal to your agency, and you need a policy for how to manage that wait list. Um, if um, let's see, I'm reading the rest of what you wrote. Um, as an agency, we do not manage the wait list. I meant like from apartments they're trying to get into, we can't control what happens. No, I'm not. And the wait list that I'm talking about here is that when you have a tenant who, or a client who wants something that you can't locate, you've shown them 10 units and none of those units were what they wanted, but they are interested in housing, you create a wait list within your own agency to keep people active and not kick them out because they turned down 10 units. You control that wait list. You cannot control what happens with landlords. Absolutely not. And but that you need to make sure that your notes are very clear about when you go to an apartment building and the person sees a unit that they like. If they don't get the unit, then you need to document that in the file, and then you need to try to figure out what you can do so that the next time the person finds a unit that they like, that they can have a better chance of getting into that apartment. But that the wait list I'm talking about here is an internal wait list, and that wait list becomes important when you're working with people on your caseload and you can't find them what they're looking for. They get to be able to you can sit down and say, okay, we've looked at everything. Right now, I can't find anything else that meets your criteria. I'm going to put you on the wait list, but I'll keep looking. And when something becomes available, I will get back in touch with you to let you know, and we'll go take a look at that. That's what I meant by the wait list. So is everybody clear on choice of housing, how we actually score it? All right. All right. That's just one dimension. So for this is the next one. This is the second dimension. And this dimension is about the separation of housing and services. So this one, there's only three parts, or actually, three. Yeah, I think there are three parts. Is the housing provider also providing services? What this is asking is the agency providing both the housing and the services? If the agency is providing both the housing and the services, you can score a 1 or a 2.5 or a 4. Uh, and that'll, and when we'll show you the scoring sheet so you can see what that, because it lays out in the scoring sheet what is a 1, what is a 2.5, and what is a 4. And so I think that's important, and we'll look at that at some point to make sure you understand that. But so you're looking at this and it's asking you, are you doing this? Is your agency doing everything? And then it's also looking at is the service provider collecting rents? What that means is we don't want to see services doing any of the property management functions. So if your agency has housing that they're using to rent out for this program, then the property manager should be the only one who's collecting rents, the only one talking about lease violations. That should not be coming from services. And I know a lot of times in agencies, sometimes the property manager is property manager over several buildings, and sometimes the service providers there in the building and the property management or the agency says, services is there, why don't you collect the rents? Well, that's a problem. We do not want to see the service provider collecting rents. Anybody have an idea of why it's not okay for housing specialists to or peers that are in the housing to be collecting rents? Anybody see a problem with that? And if so, why would it exactly? The power dynamics, the liability, the boundaries. Absolutely. You guys got it. That is right on tap. That is perfect. When you as a service provider, when you start doing property management work, it's confusing. It's now you've gone from just being my service provider to also being part of property management. So I'm not going to share with you as much information because now I'm not seeing you, the service provider on my side. I'm seeing you're collecting rents. You must be part of management. So if I tell you stuff, that information is going to be going right to the property management. And I don't want to share any things with you anymore because I I don't see you necessarily working for me. I see you working for property management or working with property management. You really want to keep those boundaries clear. You want to keep that very simple so that the clients understand that rent goes to the property manager and services is there to support the person. Another question that you get asked is, do the housing providers have an office located in the housing? We would like to see housing services or housing specialists not be located in the housing. Sometimes you don't have a choice, and that's fine, but we would prefer to see that not happening because usually when we go to see our therapist is not in our housing. Our therapist is in another place. Our therapist is going to just be focused on us and not be focused on, what we're doing in the building. So it's important to keep these two things separate. Is that clear about why we want to keep it separate? We Clients need to know what to expect, and if you start crossing those boundaries and also you don't want the liability of walking around with rent money. As a service provider, you make yourself a target if you're collecting rents because people will be like, "Oh, well, she's got money. We could take the money from her, or say you lose it. You just don't want to be in that position. And clients need to know what to expect from you. All right. So that was that. That one was easy. Those two are easy. The decent, safe, and affordable housing is actually easy, but it's a little bit more complicated. And the reason it's more complicated is that each in dimension three with the decent, safe, and affordable housing, we have to look at each individual person So each person on your on all the caseloads in your agency in this department will get a score. Every person. So we would look down a hopefully an Excel spreadsheet. And if you don't have an Excel spreadsheet at your agency, there is an amazing spreadsheet that was created and I believe is in Wiki, um, that captures all of this information in one place that your all of your staff can be using it at your agency. Makes your job a lot easier, makes it a lot easier to do a fidelity site visit or a fidelity review. Because each person, so if say you have 20 clients, each of those 20 clients are going to get a score for the percent of their income that they have to pay for rent. And when I show you the score sheet, you'll get to see this. So you don't need to write this down. But um, the way you get a 4 is that um, people are paying 30% or less of their income for rent. So that means that in this spreadsheet that you have, we need to see how much the income is of the person who is the client, and then we need to see what percentage of that income is paid for rent. So you get a 4 if it's 30% or less. If it's 31% to 40% of their income is going towards rent, then you get a 3. If it's 41% to 50%, you get a 2. If it's over 50% of their income, they get a 1. So, and when I show you the sheet, you're gonna be like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." But it is fairly easy to do if you have a spreadsheet, and in that spreadsheet, it actually will calculate the percentage so that nobody will have to sit there and do the math. Because that makes it really tough. So, say you have 20 clients in your program. So we need to get the score for each client. That means we have 20 scores of 1 through 4. We add all of those scores up together, and then we divide those scores by 20. That will give us the average of the percentage of income that tenants are paying for rent. People rarely get a 4 on this one because, again, people have choice and it's hard to get affordable housing. And a lot of people are going to end up paying more than 30% of their income for rent. So you can get a strange number on this one. You could get a 2.678888. I mean, because it goes out in percentages. So you will see weird scores for percentage of rent or percentage of income that the tenants pay for rent. Um, then does the housing meet HUD's housing quality standards? If everybody has a HQS inspection report or they have HUD housing, um, you will get a 4. And you can easily get a 4 on this by doing those walkthroughs of apartments and putting the HQS inspection report in the file. So there's no reason not to get a 4 on this. The harder part of doing this, and there have been times that I have not done an HQS inspection because it was not feasible. I'll give you an example. One tenant or one client wanted to rent a room a woman's house, and it was going to be in her basement. It was a room. I it did not feel comfortable to go into somebody's house to do a walkthrough because one, the lady was like, "This is my house. I'm willing to let him live in the basement in this room, and it had a bathroom, but I'm not willing to let you do a walkthrough of my house." So that was, that was an outside force saying, no, you can't do a walkthrough. But that was also a um a person who wanted to live there. So the person got to live there, and we never did an HQS inspection. So there are extenuating circumstances where you can't do a HQS. But most of the time it's fairly easy. This is an easy place to get your full score on one part of the dimension. Make sense? So this next one, housing integration. You can get scores of 1 to 4. So we want to know, are tenants placed in units that are set aside for people with disabilities? If And again, this goes back to the choice. People could choose to live in a place that's set aside for people with disabilities. That is perfectly fine. That is choice, and that's why we will never have a situation where you can get a perfect score, because tenants can say, I want to live in that housing. I like it. It fits my needs. And I don't care that it's for people with disabilities. And that's perfectly fine. Sometimes people, if you have your own housing, people are going to be in that housing, and all of that housing might be people with disabilities. There's nothing wrong with that. That's something that your agency can decide to do because it's easier than having to try to find housing. You will take a hit, but again, you can take a hit on a dimension and still be in fidelity. All right. So, um, so that's how we measure um, the housing integration. Are we moving people into places where they're in the community? And it gets a little confusing because we not only look at integration in communities, we look at buildings as well. We don't want to create buildings that only house people with disabilities. And sometimes um, we can create these type of situations where we create our own um, integration problems. Say we find a landlord who has, 6 units in one building, and we end up trying to fill all of those units. Well, we might have community integration, but we don't have building integration. So we've now just created a building that has all people with disabilities. And so we want to be careful. I mean, and say that's the housing you can find, and it's decent housing and people like it. That's Then, there's nothing wrong with taking that. It's just you're making a conscious choice to do that. Eva, you said, when do we have these reviews? I'm assuming you want to know, when do you get fidelity reviews? And the answer to that question is, um, agencies get to decide when they want to get those reviews. I know that this year there was an incentive, a financial incentive to get the reviews. Um, but you can get the reviews after you've been working for 6 months. You can get them after a year. And the goal at some point is to get the initial review and then have ongoing reviews to help you decide or help you look at how well you're continuously improving. So hopefully that answers your question. I know I can't give you a date because it also depends on there are two staff who are heading up these teams, and it's hard to get to every agency. And it's also, we're always looking for fidelity reviewers to go out on and do these fidelity reviews with us, or at least to do them virtually right now. And so can't give you a date. Rights of tenancy, easy one. What we're looking at here is there a lease in the tenant's name? You can get a scoring of 1 to 4. If there's a lease in the file and it's under the tenant's name, you get a 4. If there's uh not a lease, you get a 1. So if your agency is doing permanent supportive housing, you need to be requesting that tenants give you a copy of the lease and that lease is in the file, or somewhere that you can show it to the staff during the review. Does the tenant have to follow the rules that are not typically found on a standard lease agreement? So say tenants find house, or say you're providing your own housing and you have some special rules up where that people can't have guests after 10 o'clock, that you're going to do random drug testing, people need to be in services or using services in order to live in that building. um, you're going to get a lower score if you have a bunch of rules like that. Those rules are not typical rules that people have to abide by. So if you have rules like that for your housing, there's a good chance that your score will be lower on this part of the dimension. So if it's not your housing, the only way your score is going to be lower is if you're putting people, or people are moving into program housing where they're wherever they move into, that program has their own special rules. Like, I know if you're in Oxford housing, I'm assuming that there is a good possibility there would be drug drops or drops to make sure people are not using. That would be a lower score. So anytime you're moving people into Oxford housing or any type of program housing, if the lease has a bunch of rules, and I've seen I've seen pages of rules, um, that's gonna take down the score. Dimension 6 is basically looking at how do people get into your program to get housing. So is there a readiness criteria? So for instance, say you're doing this program, you're going to do permanent supportive housing, but you're only going to take people who have been in substance abuse treatment, and those people will come into your program and you will help them get housing. Basically, you've just created a readiness criteria by only working with people coming out of programs or substance use programs. We don't want to create criteria or hoops for people to jump through to get into your housing program. there should be no readiness criteria. The only criteria is that people say, I want housing. And once people say that, they should be sent right to your housing program. Um, we also want to see you targeting people with the highest need. So if you're only picking people who don't have substance abuse or mental health problems, then you're basically not working with the group of people that this is meant for. You should be targeting people who have barriers to housing. And those barriers can be mental health, substance abuse, criminal backgrounds, all of that fun stuff. Those are the people we're trying to help. Another part of this dimension is who holds the keys to the unit. If you have your own housing, or say you don't have your own housing, but services has keys to everybody's unit, that is not okay. You do not want to be holding on to keys for people in their housing. The only people that should have the keys to a tenant's unit are the landlord, the tenant, and if the tenant decides to give somebody else a key. As a service person, I never wanted anybody's key to their unit. Why didn't I want a key to their unit? Because if something happened, if somebody came into their unit, guess who was going to get the blame? I have a key, so it could have been me. I did not want that responsibility. I did not want to be accused of going into somebody's unit and taking anything. So I never held keys. I always told my staff never to have a key to get into somebody's unit. That was a property management function, not a services function. Who can enter the unit without the tenant there? The only person that should be able to go into a tenant's apartment without the tenant being there is a person from property management. And the only time property management can go into a tenant's unit is if they give notice to the tenant, and they have to give at least 48-hour notice to the tenant they're coming into their unit, or it has to be an emergency. And that that's the only time when property management can go into somebody's unit, is if there's an emergency or if they gave the person notice that they were coming into the unit. And that's how you get your score for access to housing. I'm going to stop here and ask if everybody's clear about the 7 dimensions. Oh wait, I missed a one, didn't I? I missed the flexible voluntary services. See, I was like, it said 6 up there, and I'm like, wait, there's 7 dimensions. Um, so here's the what we would like to see for flexible voluntary services. A menu of options for types of services to choose from. We want to make sure that people can choose different things. We don't want to see everybody getting the same services. We want to see people getting services that are unique to them and what they're dealing with. We want to make sure that the clients or tenants can change the frequency and the intensity of the services. If I'm a tenant and I'm doing well right now, I may not want to see you as often. And I should have that as one of my options. I don't need to see you every week. Can we change that to every other week? We also want to make sure that clients can choose no services. I don't want to see people. I don't want to see anybody. I don't need help. And we want to see that as a real option. And they won't get, I mean, hopefully whoever's designed the program has designed that and made sure that people can choose no services. We want to make sure that the services are consumer driven, meaning we want to see things in the words of the clients because that helps us to know what that they're consumer driven. If we put down their goals in their own words, that helps us to see it's consumer driven. We also look at a caseload. How many people are in your caseload? If you have too many people on your caseload, it gets to be a lot harder to do this job because what we're asking people to do is to basically you work with the person from the time they come into the program until they get housing, until you help them maintain that housing for a period of time. So you can't have a huge caseload and do this job. Does anybody know what a caseload size should be for permanent supportive housing? I see 25. Anybody think that it's 25? Any other people? Any other answers? 20. Oh, now we're going down. 12. Amanda or Kimberly? How many people? 23. I like the numbers.
For in order to have to score a 4 in supportive housing in Fidelity, you have to keep your caseload, your active caseload, between 12 and 15. To score a 3, it is between 15 and 20. So we like to really like to advise everybody to keep your intentional services with all of your participants between 12 and 15 at all times.
And there are ways to do that. And one of the things, and we can talk about this a little bit later, but um, I like to have my case or my housing specialist have an active caseload. And that active caseload means that those are the people that you're actively working with. Now, some people will can be on your caseload and you're having a hard time finding them or connecting with them. You have a phone number, but nobody's answering. It keeps going to voicemail. And you're thinking, I can't keep doing this. I need people on my caseload that I can be actively working with. You can put them, and this would require you working with your managers, but you can set up an inactive caseload where you're still keeping those people on the caseload, but right now you can't find them. Doesn't mean you stop trying to look for them. When you lose a person off of your caseload, or say one of the people on your caseload is housed and is doing well, you can look for another person. You go back to your inactive caseload and try to get in touch with some of those people again and see if you can get in touch with them, and then see if you can work with them, and so they move from the inactive to the active. So you can make this work and keep your caseload sizes down by, actively, moving people between caseloads. If you can't get in touch with them, why keep them on your active caseload? Put them on an inactive caseload, but still come back to them when you have an opening. We want to make sure also that the services are provided by a team. We don't want to see um we want the whole team to be working with um the person. So if, say for instance, there's a team of 3 people. You should all be meeting to talk about caseloads, talk about where you're at with people. And the reason you want to do that is if one case manager or housing specialist goes on to, say, I don't know, he or she goes on maternity leave, or they just had a baby, and one person goes on leave, the rest of the team have to pick up the slack for that one person. And the way you do that is by talking about that caseload, so everybody's clear about what's happening and what's going on, and that you're not sitting there going, I don't know what's going on with this person. So the services need to be provided by a team, and the services should be 24/7. And that's not a lot of teams don't operate 24/7. Maybe some of the teams who have their own housing operate 24/7, but most teams don't operate 24/7. You can
Hey, Pat,
supplement. Yeah,
I don't mean to interrupt. Well, I do mean to interrupt, but I don't mean
it
to
is
be
time.
rude.
It's time for us to
It
stop.
it's time for us to stop. It's lunchtime.
I know it's lunchtime, and we'll pick up here. And if you have questions, and I see a question in the box, we'll come back to those. But let's on on in 2 days, we'll be finishing this up, and I'll be showing you a lot more information. So thank you, everybody, and I'll see you on the 15th.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you, Washington. We appreciate all of our attendees today, and we appreciate you, Pat. And we'll see everybody on Thursday. Remember, if you are here to become a Fidelity reviewer and you don't finish the second half, you'll have to come back in December for retraining. So please make sure you come back for day 2, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Thursday, and we'll see you then. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great lunch and be safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.